Welcome again, Paul Giannamore.
Thank you, Daniel. Great to be back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good to have you again. How are things?
Yeah. Well, it was a busy fourth quarter. I think you and I don't remember when we spoke last, maybe April, May, something like that.
Yeah.
Everything was pretty much stopped, right? And then by the time, as we all suspected, by the time the fourth quarter rolled around, it was time to get everything done. So I feel like we crammed all of 2020's acquisition activity into the fourth quarter. In North America and globally, both Rentokil and Anticimex were extremely active towards the end of the year. Rollins and ServiceMaster, or now Terminix, not so much, but Rentokil went out and raised, I think, probably 600 or 700 billion euro at 50 basis points, and definitely put that money to work. As per usual, the extreme majority of the acquisition activity took place in North America. We didn't see a whole lot on the European continent nor much in Asia, but I expect that to actually accelerate here in 2020 or 2021, I should say. I gotta get used to saying 2021.
Actually, a funny point, right? Because I think everybody that's interested or is you actively working in the M&A field in pest control thought when coronavirus appeared in March, April, or let's say we didn't think, but we weren't certain about how the future of the M&A business is going to go. And even in 2019, beginning of 2020, you thought maybe there is a bubble because obviously prices and the multiples have been skyrocketing already in pest control. So it was the best time to sell by then. But now multiples have gone up even further with money printing and the fiscal bazooka, etc. So did it really have an effect, or is this just me surveying it?
Well, I think you're right, actually. I don't think any of us anticipated how any of these governments and central banks were going to react to COVID-19. And clearly, I mean, in the United States, the US federal government completely went mental and just pulled out all stops. European Central Bank a little bit more conservative, but I think in 21, we'll probably continue to see ramp up there with the ECB as well as with on the fiscal side. Clearly, asset prices and stock markets are completely disconnected with the real economy, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just
it doesn't have anything to do anymore with earnings or whatnot. It's not anymore.
Yeah. So we saw in Q4, we saw transaction multiples to be at least on par, and in certain cases higher than we had in 2019. Which is it's a good thing for sellers. The U.S. market was largely driven by Rentokil and Anticimex, and as we all know, Anticimex intends to file to go public. I was originally expecting for them to do it after the Swedish holidays. I think the plan now is probably around April 1st, probably try to get it out the door before Easter.
Wow. Most exciting news
they've locked up the They locked up the banking syndicate, and analyst meetings will begin here around the 20th of January. So I think we'll see Anticimex go into some sort of a quiet period here. They'll probably slow down with some material acquisition, but they'll continue to do smaller ones.
I was about to ask, after the IPO, and now that Rentokil's been listed for a very long while, and Anticimex is going on IPO now, will it change or slow down the M&A process? Is that something we can at least participate or give a good guess, an estimate on what's going to happen, or do you think it's going to just rise as always?
That's a great question. In my experience, when companies go public, they tend to de-lever and slow down on acquisition activity. It's hard to say what Anticimex will do. Just so many of these pest control transactions tend to be accretive to the bottom line. And now that Anticimex has built out substantial platforms, a lot of the smaller deals can be pretty accretive. So, we might see a slowdown on geographic creep, but I don't think they're going to slow down on density and tuck-in acquisitions in Europe and the United States. So that's what I think.
Yeah. And what's with Orkin, by the way, with 400 million plus in the bank, probably now 450, I would say. Why are they so defensive? How come that most of the headlines we read are Rentokil and Anticimex?
Yeah, Rollins is a pretty conservative business. And as we all know, there's been a changing of the guards last year Randall Rollins, the chairman, passed away, and Jerry now is the president of Rollins. So there'll be some continuing changes there. I think we'll see a more aggressive Rollins from a acquisition standpoint. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to eventually, probably here in 2021, see Rollins willing to bend returns and pay more for acquisitions that they really want. So I think that's coming. I think that for a lot of these companies like Terminix and for Rollins, COVID's been great for them. It's been great for all of these companies. In Europe, Anticimex and Rentokil have really doubled down on disinfectant. In the United States, we've seen an increase in residential pest control service activity. And I think when that happens, when I talk to some of the senior guys at companies like Rollins and Terminix, the managers are looking at their division saying, hey, we've been super busy, we're making money hand over fist, we're hitting our budgets. But the question becomes, is COVID just a bump for them? And then it's going to go down and they've got to increase acquisition activity to make up for that growth. I believe that'll be the case. And I think Rollins is going to have to step up the acquisition activity probably by Q2 if they want to make their numbers.
Yeah, probably, I would say. I mean, and even, so many things happening with more conservative US businesses, not only Rollins, but also with Terminix, right? I mean, it was ServiceMaster, now it's also listed under Terminix, I think, and they had a change in management as well, right? So a lot of things happened in the past year that weren't too positive for the company, I guess, at least when you read the headlines. So how do you perceive them, and what is going to be the future for Terminix short term?
That's an interesting question. So Brett, the new CEO, came on September 15th. Tony, the CFO, is transitioning out. He'll be gone by the end of March. There's a new CFO coming on board. Kim Scott, who's the president of the residential division, has been around since December of 19. So she's still relatively new. So yeah, we have the entire management changeover once again with Terminix. Over the last couple of months, we were finally able to get some deals done. If you remember, I think last time you and I spoke, Terminix had kind of its big blow up in the fall of 19 and left hundreds of millions of busted deals out there. So fortunately enough, we were able to get some of those done in Q4. As it turns out, over the last couple of months, I've come to realize I've been contacted by a lot of European firms and realized that they were pretty close to getting some European deals done that blew up. And so now those folks are heading back out into the market, which I think will be opportunities for Rentokil and Anticimex. These are firms that never really went through the process with Rentokil and Anticimex, and now wanted to, hey, we wanted to sell before Terminix blew up. Now we want to get at it again. So I think we're going to see Terminix be relatively conservative for the first half of 21 from an acquisition perspective. I think a lot of the problems that they had in the fall of 19 were related to their crazy spend. Yeah. And board's taking a conservative approach, and I think the new management team will wade in very slowly and be very strategic about the deals they make. So yeah, that's that.
So maybe from my perspective, obviously, I'm not making the deals. I've never made one, but from the headlines that you read and from the perception of the companies, and you said change in management. From my point of view, if I look at it, Anticimex and Rentokil are very forward-driven, M&A-oriented businesses, fast-moving, dynamic businesses that know what kind of effects you can do, consolidating, purchasing new companies for high validations even, and growing the company inorganically. Obviously, if you inherit a company or if there's a conservative management or something like that, and you're not familiar that exists, or you're not familiar in these new ways of growing your business in the past 20 years, then you probably miss out on a big market share, I guess. But do you think it's really actually that easy and that black and white that Anticimex and Rentokil and obviously the others too, but not to that degree, have kind of got it that inorganic growth is the go-to thing to drive your company? Is that easy to say that it's just, for instance, Jarl and the famous interview that you had with him in Stockholm, who obviously knows how to play the game. Is that game and the playing of it, is it limited to only a few players internationally?
Look, I think you and I chatted before. You've got some upstarts here in North America. We talked about Certus, for example, a private equity firm that's going out making acquisitions. When I look at Rentokil, Andy Ransom is at the end of the day a deal maker, and that's how they've built that business. And he continues to be rewarded by the public equity markets for doing deals. The same thing goes for Anticimex. I mean, these guys will, some of the discussions that I have with the heads of some of these companies is they look around and they say transaction multiples are ridiculous. These valuations are way too high. But as long as we get rewarded or we'll continue to be rewarded for that, we're going to continue that activity. Organic growth is king. Organic growth is where most companies should be focused. I think when you take a company like, Anticimex, they have to get scale, right? And it takes a long time to grow a business organically. If you want to enter into new markets, you pretty much have to do deals. So that's been Anticimex's focus, right? But as far as Rentokil goes, I think when I think about Rentokil, their focus is to really get it above 1.5 billion US in revenue in North America. Mm-hmm. And they believe the bigger that they can get, and they breach that 1.5 billion mark, it'll allow them to get additional scale economies and further density, which would have a positive impact on their cash flow. So that's their theory. So they'll continue to do deals, and they spent a good 500 million or so over the last 3 or 4 months in the U.S. doing transactions. Probably bought in 2020, probably about 180 million US in revenue. So that's quite a bit for them in North America. When we look at the companies they bought some premium assets, bought a PCT top 100 companies. We sold a business called McNeely. Yeah, environmental pests. There's McNeely Pest Control down in, these are deals that haven't even been announced yet, but I'll talk about them. McNeely Pest in North Carolina. They bought Bain up in New England. They bought a company called Blue Chip, and it's a PCT top 100 company in the middle of the country, and a handful of others in the fourth quarter. So it was real busy.
That's impressive. Look, what always makes me wonder is, obviously, as you said, valuations are crazy and too high maybe, but you still keep on buying. But then again, if you look at fiscal policy and the development of the central banks, et cetera, and just printing money, and you look at other asset classes, which in the end you have to do when you're a deal maker like Andy, like Jarl, you have to think about how you use the potential of your cash flow towards, taking the debt and raising money and doing acquisitions elsewhere with scaling effects that are there, obviously. But when you look at asset prices overall, and also other asset classes like housing, metals like gold or stocks, obviously, which are crazy, is there just a new reality, and will we have to adapt to absolutely new crazy ways of valuation in the next 5 to 10 years? Because we're looking back retrospectively and always thinking, this is crazy, this is nuts, based on what we knew 2018 or something. This is absolutely nuts and blowing our minds. But is it going to be continuing to 2025 or 2030? Because where else to put your money, right? In the end, a healthy business that's, as you said, as a service business, very revenue strong or EBITDA strong, or margin strong, it's still the best place to put your money probably in the future, where so many things are uncertain, and pest control turn out to be a critical business segment, right? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, it is really a great question, and these countries are engaging in such enormously irresponsible activities, and here I am speaking to a German, and you folks have a history, a modern history of having a lot of, every German's afraid of inflation and monetary debasement for very good reasons, and. I used to try to prognosticate the future, and, I have either been wrong or too early a lot of times since quantitative easing started back in 2009, 2010, right? I thought, man, this is really going to drive markets up. It's going to create inflation, which it is not. The question is, what does this debasement do to these currencies? I have particular concerns when I look. I have less concerns about Europe and the rest of the world, more concerns about the United States. I mean, there's such a level of division and populism there. There's a lot of talk about modern monetary theory. Let's just print whatever we want, drive up the debt as far as we can drive it up, and money for everyone. I mean, hell, the U.S. government's sending out checks to people now. So the question becomes, it's ridiculous, Daniel. So the question becomes, at what point does this turn into a sovereign kind of debt crisis? Are they just going to kick this up until it becomes a currency crisis? And I know all of us in the modern world here haven't really lived through those crises, right? You got Venezuela and Zimbabwe, but in the developed Western world, we haven't lived through that. I think a lot of us believe that it can't happen. I mean, the question is, can it? And so I look at what goes on with things like Bitcoin.
Exactly. I was about to ask the question. Yeah, you could not speak about cryptocurrency in the moment. Yeah.
Are you a crypto guy? Do you invest in cryptocurrencies?
I honestly believe they're going to grow a bit more. So I think the 100 or 200K targets are not unrealistic, but I'm more into raw metals and stuff like that, and actual limited assets. I still don't get that the guy who invented Bitcoin still keeps like 1 million Bitcoins and has such much control over the currency and basically founded it. So how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think probably in the relative short term that'll take off. I don't see that. I don't see Bitcoin, or at least Bitcoin in its current form, replacing the monetary system. I'm more of for me, and I guess the German comes out of you with the hard assets, with the metals, with the real estate, with the things that you touch. Yeah, I mean, I believe that's the case. I don't know that Bitcoin's going to replace 5,000 years of history with things like gold and silver. So, the thing about it is, and one of the things that we grapple with all the time, so we deal with investors that, exit their business. Now they have 100 million or 250 million euros.
What
right?
to do with it?
So the question becomes, what do you do with it? And I think that, historically that hasn't been a big concern for folks, but now it's a very big concern because you worry about inflation evaporating it. You worry about, can you put it in the market? Well, we are literally at an all-time high right now, right? Implied forward returns are negative for the next decade. So where do you put that money? And it's a very, very difficult thing for a lot of these sellers to grapple with, actually.
I know. I mean, we've always been talking also on Talking Pest Management to pest management CEOs and technical people and also scientists. And we've always come across a very interesting thesis, which is they're good pest control people most of the time, but their board isn't diverse. So we have pesties who know everything about Blatella or ratas and whatever. But you don't have marketing people, digital people, IoT people, CFOs, financial people, accountants and whatnot in the board so many times. And then again, all these people, great pest managers or great entrepreneurs, is also on a different card. And what I want to, I've seen a couple of people exit for great valuations, not only in our industry, but then they never really care to make money because they grew their business. All they knew is grow their business, maybe buy a house and, some nice interior or whatnot. And then all of a sudden they have to deal with how to invest 10, 50, 100, 200, 500 million euros or dollars whatsoever. And it's really not that easy if you're, as you said, every day we're reaching new all-time highs. Every day, with fiat policy, everything could crash down. But honestly, many, even myself included, have, said many times, 2017 and 18, the crash is coming. And I made myself a fool a couple of times with having been able to, or missed out on the opportunity of having gone 10x with, pick a random stock or so.
Yep.
And, so I don't really want to be in their shoes, to be honest, because I think still the best asset is probably like the pest control business, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, a pest control business is extremely asset light, right? You've got a high degree of visibility on future cash flow. It is a great business. And a lot of these smaller pest control businesses are almost like owning a bond, right? And you have a certain amount of control over pricing. The regulatory environment continues to be more and more bullish for pest control service providers, and that, clamping down on the use of rodenticides and chemicals and so on and so forth. And I think, one of the things that potentially bodes well for the North American market is with the new administration in the United States more focused on environmental and ESG type stuff. So I think that it bodes well for the pest control industry. And Europe tends to lead this kind of regulatory advancement of the regulatory framework, I guess is one way to put it. But if you have the ability to invest in a privately held pest control business at a relatively lower entry valuation, you're far better doing that than buying Rollins, which last time I looked was trading at 90 times earnings or something, right?
How much?
And then, I think it was around 90 times earnings.
90, really? Last time I looked, it was like 60 or something. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's really on a tear. And, the other interesting factor is, we're going to have a new pest control offering, right, with Anticimex. So that becomes very interesting because really we have Terminix is pure play pest, Rollins is pure play pest. We've got Rentokil, which is still an amalgamation, but now we're going to have another player. And I guess we can include Ecolab, but it's only less than 10% of the portfolio is pest. So it'll be interesting. They're going to be on the Stockholm Stock Exchange, right, as opposed to the US. And their peers, you've got, Rentokil's at 17 times forward EBITDA, give or take. Terminix is around 20. Orkin's deep into the 40s. So where will they ultimately trade has kind of been the talk of the town over the last couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how the market views Anticimex.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, with Rollins as a benchmark, if I'm the Anticimex guys, I'm hoping that I'm viewed more as Rollins than I am a Terminix or a Rentokil. But I think that'll be a very interesting event for all of us in the pest control industry this year to see what sort of interest that gets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think due to their popular marketing and the actual effects of smart and the integration of preventative pest control, which is a little bit different to what other businesses do, or some others might as well do, but they don't use it as strongly in their marketing, I suppose. But I fully agree. I think it's going to be the event of this year, and looking at how the market is going to react to it, and also looking at how Anticimex's management is going towards further growth, if they're going to slow down or build in their qualitative, the quality out to a certain degree, integrate more IoT and data-driven control. It's going to be really interesting. But how do you see the whole environmental and digital change affecting these businesses in a mid and long term?
Last time you and I chatted, I told you that I was very bullish on the whole digital aspect and really applying technology to the industry. I guess like everything, it kind of starts slowly and then happens all at once. So I think we're still in that phase. I think what I'm starting to see is over the course of the last 12 months, especially during COVID, a lot of smaller kind of upstarts on tech-enabled aspects of the pest control industry have reached out to us and had some chats. There's some interesting companies out there doing some things. It's going to take some time. I know that Rentokil's investing more. They've got their kind of innovation center there in London. They're investing more in that. I think you'll see Rollins start to get more and more into that as well.
So much money in the bank, they should really, shouldn't they?
Yeah. But it's like every sort of change within an industry. You've got a lot of participants that their jobs and their livelihoods are built and based on the old way things have happened, right? They're not incentivized to make these changes. So I think change will be slow. Mm-hmm. I do think that Anticimex, though, is driving a lot of, we spend a lot of time talking to institutional investors, but I also spend time dealing with large kind of commercial clients for pest control businesses, for example, North America and primarily in Europe, or I'll talk to some of Rentokil's big national accounts. I'll talk to Rollins' big national accounts. And I try to get a sense for how the large customers of these pest control businesses are viewing them, how they think about the different service providers, how they make their buying decisions. And I think one thing that's slowly gathering steam is Anticimex has been effective in educating potential end users that there's other ways to do things. But I do think that it's very slow still.
Would you agree with the thesis that an end customer, let's take just McDonald's or Starbucks or Nestle, so not residential, but first of all, commercial. If you'd ask them, they probably prefer, that's my thesis, at least you can comment on, a digital 24/7 surveillance over a regular service, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, the discussions that I have is that first and foremost is they prefer effective service. Like they, at the end of the day, it can be digital as you want to be. But if I'm an old analog guy and I'm using traps and nets and, toxic chemicals, if I can get rid of your problem, they're going to go with me because I can handle the situation. And I think that trying to educate, I do think, in that discussion that I had with Jarl, he talked about the potato chip manufacturer in Italy, which their use of Anticimex and the smart technology was largely driven by what customers wanted to see, right? So you've got kind of, what becomes interesting to me is as if the consumer, whether it's the commercial or consumer or it's the actual individual consumer, prefers or favors companies that they view are more environmentally friendly, it's going to, that kind of goes up the chain, right? So I want to go to McDonald's because I know they don't use any toxic chemicals. So I'm going to choose McDonald's over Burger King. Well, now McDonald's is going to choose the provider that provides the digital non-tox, and that kind of goes up that way. And that's where we see that. And that's where I think you'll see companies like Anticimex spending more time on kind of educating, even the average consumer that chooses the commercial customer. This is what we do. This is why we do it. This is why it's important that you should choose businesses that are doing this, and therefore we're going to choose Anticimex and so forth. It's a long process, so Daniel, as you well know.
Yeah, can't agree more. If I still remember, Yara called it the next best thing to sliced bread because it boxes of environmentally, it's front running and it's also higher efficiency. So, but do you also see it coming back to the customers? And I fully agree. In the end, the customer probably doesn't care that much about pest control services. I think they might do. So it's unrealistic to think they will drive it because they think the product or the solution is great. They just want an effective pest control contract that doesn't cost the world. So, but do you think like the basic homeowner in, I don't know, Illinois or something, or New York is going to prefer a, let's say, environmentally friendly working pest controller, or is in an even higher extent, are they going to buy their smart traps on Amazon at some point and just, get an app and press whatever you like? Platform thinking, obviously, Amazon is a platform, a marketplace. All these companies, like we started talking about the innovation center of Rentokil, which is great, and Anticimex has one too, which is pretty cool. And I think both companies are doing just the right thing there. But do you think, like in other industries, is there going to be the infamous disruptor, or is pest control just not B2C consumer goods or whatnot?
Well, that's a great question. When I think about, historically, when I first got into pest control in the early 2000s, and I started to advise these companies, I would actually personally get excited about, okay, this is a pest control business that, uses natural products, non-toxic, the whole 9 yards. And then what I ended up actually seeing, though, is the reality of the situation is that oftentimes those were less effective, they cost more, and the consumers just want, you've got a bug problem in your house. You want the bug problem gone. So at what point do you actually care? And the other thing is, I think the industry's done a great job in kind of moving away from, chlorine and all these very bad toxic chemicals to things that are relatively inert with not massively long residuals. And so the question is, what we see, for example, in the United States is every company now is a almost quote unquote natural company. Yeah, we use chemicals that are non-toxic and pet safe and child safe. And there's really no differentiation or distinction between any pest business now. And so the other question is, I get the rodent traps in the monitoring and the tech-enabled aspect of that. What really is very difficult is if you've got crickets and ants and wasps in your home, you need to use pesticide, right? So, yes. I just don't know that. I don't know that there's a massive opportunity, at least with the current technology that we have on the consumer side. On the commercial side, much more so. But on the residential, I don't know.
Agreed. But could you imagine, like, all of these pest control products are most of the times in some plastic boxes, right? So if there's some means to detect them, like with future AI-driven cameras or whatsoever, like, Nest, basically the famous Nest acquisition by, I think, was it Google or was it Amazon? I don't remember anymore. But if that will be possible, it will be probably like giving it another kick in our industry, right?
Yeah. I mean, I always try to, when I think about pest control, I always try to put like my wife and I in the shoes of a pest control buyer and say to myself, okay, here's my house. Do I really care to have, specific AI driven? No, there's spiders here. We need to get rid of this. That's the only issue that we have. Let's call the bug guy and he can take care of it. Simple as that, right? So again, I try to just think about it how a consumer is thinking about it. And I think the big thing, though, Daniel, is, as we always know, is we just don't know what technology will even be in existence 5 years from now, right? We just don't know that. Everyone is innovative. And so it'll be interesting to see what's right around the corner. I don't know that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So enough talk about environmental and digital solutions. I'm really looking forward to the progress in the next 5 years as well. There's definitely going to be some interesting things for sure from the big ones, but also from some minor ones. If you ask me personally, I think a lot of people are aiming, even startups are obviously aiming to disrupt an industry, etc. But honestly, we're not a consumer goods industry where you can disrupt a market overnight. So I don't think that's going to happen really quickly. But there is enough market share around the world to get a couple of customers and live healthily by it. So the question that I have is, distributors, manufacturers, I asked you off record before our interview, what do you think about it? And you said that obviously the distributors and brands, the manufacturers of pest control goods are more consolidated in North America, which is the main market. But we only read about service business and acquisitions, M&A, and the service business world. Is it going to stay that way, or are we going to see some movement in the manufacturer distributor world again?
I think we'll see more movement on the manufacturer side than on the distribution side. As you and I discussed, it is a very consolidated industry already in North America. In Europe, it's more fragmented. So there is some consolidation activity or potential, but I mean, I think about it, I don't know, there's 20 some odd thousand pest control companies in North America. There's, I can almost count on my hands how many distribution businesses there are that do more than 10 million per year in revenue in this particular industry, right? It's just not that much.
Yeah. And furthermore, I mean, if we've learned one thing, distributors have a hard time in current times with, changing markets basically, and brands or manufacturers are starting to go directly. So if one thing is going to happen that I might think could come is that distributors are going to have a hard time in the next 5 or 10 years, even though it's specialty products like pest control, and manufacturers are going to go, use the internet basically and try to go direct. Anyways, You never know. But what about Certus, right?
Certus.
So that's really interesting. I've seen that in the world of Amazon a couple of times where, just people that are deal makers raised money and bought small sellers that were privately held Amazon sellers, and then put it all in a package and create value, use obviously the effects that you could with creating a bigger business, like just one accounting office, etc., one headquarters. Is that basically the same thing happening in pest control with Certus?
Yeah, I mean, Certus is run by, Mike Giblin runs Certus. He owned a bird company, was acquired by Stereotech, ended up at Rentokil, left Rentokil, went to Anticimex, left Anticimex and started Certus. So Mike's a good guy, and it's a tough market for them to be in. If you think about, the U.S. pest control acquisition market's extremely competitive. If you think about it, almost every single transaction that we take out to market, we've got at bare minimum Rentokil, Anticimex, Rollins, and Terminix looking at it. So you've got 4 massively large companies with very deep pockets looking at the deal. And then you have on occasion, you have some regionals. Like we actually, on the Boardroom Buzz episode that'll come out today, we had Kevin Burns, who's the head of M&A for Arrow. Now, Arrow is a relatively small business in the whole scheme of things. It does 280 million US in turnover. So in the US pest control space, it's a medium-sized kind of regional business, but you have even those firms getting involved in acquisitions. I think Kevin does maybe between 6 and 8 transactions a year. So it's tough, I think, for Certus to compete. And, the question becomes, it's a classic private equity backed roll-up, right? So the intention is 5 to 7 years, buy as much as you can, rationalize those businesses, turn around and exit them. It's a very difficult time to be doing that. It would have been a fantastic time to do that in the 90s or the early 2000s, right? Go out and buy these things at 5 times trailing and turn around and sell them for 15. But I think they're good guys. I think they appeal to, every acquirer has a different flavor. Like, for example, when I deal with folks in Europe, particularly in the UK, they hate Rentokil. Why do they hate Rentokil? They've competed against Rentokil for so long. And you go to the UK and, at least 50% of the pest controllers there at one point in time or other worked for Rentokil, and they broke off and started their business, and they've got 0 patients for Rentokil, right? And that's why companies like Rollins and Terminix will ultimately do well in the UK, because it's an alternative to Rentokil.
So you say that there is a market for Certus. There's actually a sweet spot.
I think there's always, yes. So I think the fact that no one's ever competed against them, they're an unknown. They appeal to folks that hate Terminix and hate Orkin because they've always competed against them, and that's their another choice. That's helped Anticimex, by the way, in the United States. They have not been, it's always, just like in a lot of places in the world, it's always been Rentokil. In the US, it's always been Terminix and Orkin. So it's helped Anticimex, and in a lot of ways, it helped Rentokil build up quite a big base because they were the unknown. When I deal with Asian players, folks in Asia say, Paul, I don't even want Rentokil to come into process. I don't want anything to do with Rentokil. We're interested in Terminix, or we're interested in Anticimex, or we're interested in Rollins because we don't compete against them. We hate Rentokil, and that happens. And
yeah, I've seen it in some companies. I gotta admit that, especially the employees and the sales reps, etc., are very contrary to, or hate this or the other company. It's funny. It's a funny small industry, I guess, but there's some room for Certus for sure. So it's really interesting to see where that's going to come out. But Mike's a great guy, but it's definitely a tough job to do, I guess. Yeah, but it's fun.
Very tough.
Spicing up the industry. So what's in for you? It's you're the guy that knows things before all others do. You're the guy for M&A and pest control. How did the past years change? What did you take with it, and what did you like most, and what did you take away with it most? So the personal, the Paul behind the business Paul, what did you take away with it? So how was the past years?
Well, I'm trying to think of last time we did the show, Daniel, I know it was in the middle of COVID, like we had nothing going on at the time. So everything hit the brakes. And then in all the deals that were put on hold around October 1st began to happen. And that happened in October 1st for a variety of reasons. Number one, people got more visibility on COVID situation. Number two, a lot of the big companies wanted to be able to push announcements into January and February and March of 2021. So, Rentokil released a little bit of information last week, which I wrote on as you discussed, but they're very opaque as to what they did, what they spent money on, and they'll trickle that out over time. But yeah, I mean, Q4 2020 was our busiest quarter on record, but largely because everything was kind of jammed in, last minute. We did 10 transactions in the last 90 days of the year, which is insane. I think that when COVID first happened, I looked at an equity market that was already extremely frothy. And I thought to myself, well, is COVID going to be the pin that finally pricks this? No matter what, is this finally going to bring this market down? Well, what we ended up seeing is governments react in ways that I think none of us had expected. And even now, after spending trillions of dollars, the US government, now with Biden coming in, will spend trillions more over the coming months, right? And so that money has to go somewhere. I know that I'm kind of a libertarian-minded guy. I don't believe in state intervention in markets. I think it has a lot of very bad effects. One being the monetary systems that we're under now, with the central planning, I think tremendously impacts wealth inequality. When you're issuing a tremendous amount of sovereign debt, you're taking that sovereign debt and you're allowing a company like Rentokil to borrow at 50 basis points. What that does is that concentrates power amongst consolidators. So it gives more power to large companies versus smaller ones. It tremendously increases the wealth of individuals that hold assets to the expense that people like, I come from a blue-collar background and my parents kind of toiled every day to provide a living for our family. Make very much money. We never wanted for anything. But when I look at, the clients that we deal with every single day, and I'm a very fortunate beneficiary. I benefit from asset price inflation tremendously, right? But at the end of the day, it has a very deleterious effect on society. And so now what governments will do is they'll say, okay, you've got this populism of everyone's focused on the wealthy, right? The billionaires, the wealthy. Well, governments have created this by their own policies. And now the way to kind of attack that is to go after, confiscatory tax policies. Right now, we've created all these billionaires. Now let's take all this money back. And you just get into this whole loop of more and more government control over things, which I think creates disincentive. So I think for me, one of the biggest learning points for me, I think in 2020, the world had already experienced decades of fiat money inflation, of governments becoming more and more powerful, of more and more wealth inequality. And I think 2020 for me was the year where kind of all bets are off and we're just going to do crazy shit. We're just going to print money, issue debt. Governments are really just going to begin to take over. And we'll see kind of a shift away from freer markets. We'll see a shift towards populism. We'll see more of a shift we see it in the States, we see it in Europe. So that's what I personally believe, and that's what I'm seeing kind of more or less in you see it in Europe, you definitely see it in the States. What do you see in Germany? What's the I always appreciate I'm an Italian national, and I understand the German people when they look at the European Union, when they look at the European Central Bank. I think it's a bad deal for Germans. I don't think you guys should have ever got involved in that racket to begin with. And I know Europeans tend to look at it and say, well, the European experiment, look, there hasn't been a war here for decades and we're all friends. And I personally believe in my heart that it's the European project that will also ultimately, it's the bringing everyone together, which I always thought was impossible in Europe, will ultimately be what drives it apart. And I'm interested. So what is a German public feeling about this grand European experiment now?
So I don't feel too...
on the record.
So I cannot speak for all of the 83 million Germans, obviously. But if you ask me, I'm also... So I think the fiat money system was, it was generally the thought behind it, and we have it for quite a while, especially since QE in 2009. Shit had the fan, and in 2013 again in Europe with the Greek crisis, etc. And now we print money, whatever it takes, but it's still within the fiat system, as you said. And the fiat system was basically invented to create wealth to everybody, and most of the people have benefited from it, I want to say, but it's now really spreading classes even further, the rich and the poor and whatsoever. And I think, honestly, what's happening is probably that all this debt that exists in Europe and all the distrust of unequal countries like, Germany, Greece, Spain, Italy, and all the debt differences there is definitely going to cause some challenges. I know that the leadership, obviously, which is going to change dramatically in 2021, as Angela Merkel, who is kind of the head of it all, I want to say, at least a lot of state heads look up to her, is going to resign. And I really don't know, but my wild guess would be that we have everything that we do, even, when you look at the 50 basis points Rentokil raised money on, and looking at obviously they have most of the pest control businesses have great, have a lot of money in the bank, etc. But a lot of debt overweighs in states and companies and zombie firms, etc. And that's, I want to say, the majority. And something has to happen at some point, because it's been over a decade, way over a decade now, that the debt is just blown up, and everybody talks about bubbles. So a couple of ways to get rid of debt. It's either paying it back, which is laughable because you get more money having the.
Which can't happen.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. I mean, you exit your business now for 100 million. You put it in the bank. You have less money next year. That's guaranteed if you just leave it there. But so there's a couple things like inflation or even hyperinflation. And I'm looking at the wheat prices and other prices, not weed, but wheat. I hope I said that correctly. My German English. I don't know about wheat prices. Anyways, they kind of exploded, I think, from 80 to 120 or something. And so there's either inflation they're gonna get rid of all this debt, or just cutting it, I guess. But I'm luckily I only have to deal with with what we do at Futura to help make our industry a little bit more smarter. But it's really indeed a funny issue. Past 10 years, every German in the world in Germany was really driven to buy real estate, and we've got one of the hottest markets. Frankfurt is actually on the I think HSBC did a study on the hottest real estate bubbles in the world, and I think after was it Australia or something? It was right after it was Frankfurt and Munich. So I think there's definitely things to happen in our conservative little country here as well, but it's probably not going to affect the world too much, I hope.
What you just said is there's really two ways to get rid of this debt: either pay it back, which we know we can do, or inflate it away, right? So what the question is ultimately what becomes of that. And I think that that's what has to happen. And obviously, yeah. And so when those days come, a lot of the owners that I talk to, I mean, it's really an interesting situation now, because you had what you would view as kind of the over the last 15 years or so, the folks that talked about inflation of the money supply and all these types of things were kind of on the fringe, right? Or they were either Germans or they were on the fringe, right? Some Austrians perhaps, but nowadays it's becoming almost mainstream, and the discussion of Bitcoin, right? Like the hardcore Bitcoiners are the guys that believe in the destruction of the fiat monetary system, which I actually agree with that. Like I don't necessarily know if Bitcoin will replace that. That's where I have the issue, but I do agree with their fundamental philosophy. But these whole discussions now are kind of bringing these types of discussions more and more mainstream. And so you have a lot more business owners talking about, not even ones that are selling, but the ones that have resources. Like, what do you do with that? What do you do with it? And real estate's bid up, right? And you talked about it in Germany. So the prices are super high there. So what do you do? I don't know.
Everything bubble. And going in at all-time highs is only give you a bad feeling because you think at some time it's going to bust. And when there's a correction in the market, it's going to be a hard correction for sure. I agree, but yeah, it's really hard. I think given the crypto and the blockchain, it's an incredible idea. And honestly, we are also working on a silicon economy. So really in digital things, paying via crypto, etc. And also it's a safe storage of money because of the system behind it. So it has incredible effects. But on the other side, it's never going to replace, we're never going to pay in Bitcoin for once. It can't be used as a precious metal in the industry. And some guy named Satoshi apparently, or maybe the Chinese government or whatever that sits behind it that invented blockchain or Bitcoin, still has, 5% of all Bitcoins and could destroy the Bitcoin valuation overnight. So it's really, I wouldn't pour all my money in it. It's really definitely interesting. And I'm sure it's going to continue on rising. I think it's almost $35,000 now. I think, I've read that Europe and other states have signed, rights to the digital euro and stuff like that. And I know China is already doing a lot of things with their digital currencies. So it's definitely something that's going to come. But Bitcoin was the first, and I think that's why it has that branding. But there have been many ICOs, initial coin offerings, which people have gone bust. And it's really, I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of somebody that just exited, for 100 million plus and now distributing the money. Probably the worst thing you could do with it, or the easiest way, is just buy land and a farm and just, keep your eyes shut of all the bubbles that will go bust in the next couple of years.
Probably, indeed.
Or watch it like we do, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you can't watch nowadays. There's no supply anywhere, right? I mean,
I know.
It's so scarce now to get a quality watch.
Yeah. Cool. I mean, talking about watches, I think people have enjoyed, as a last topic, I have very much enjoyed your Jarl interview. And I think, Jarl, this interview really made him kind of a legend. So I really hope you're going to interview and get Andy Ransom one day, because I think he's no less of a legend. So that's going to be really interesting for one day. But the Jarl interview really went to a couple, many people talked to me about it in the industry. And so really one of the coolest things you could have ever done. I've seen on the picture that you did with him, he's wearing a piece. I'm not trying to expose you, Jarl, but it was a nice Patek Philippe. So congratulations.
I that like 2 weeks before that interview. Yeah, indeed.
So on the gray market, or did he get it well, that's probably not for the public.
Public, but yeah, he got it on the gray market. He ended up probably cost €65,000 or something, right? I mean, I don't.
Yeah, but it is the watch. I still remember like 10 years ago, people said it looks like a TV. You can't buy that watch. They would sit in the shelves, but
yeah, absolutely.
It's funny.
I remember sitting in the shelf, and now they go for like 3 or 4 times retail. I really wanted the white dial Nautilus, which is now discontinued, and you can get it on the gray market, but I just can't justify spending that sort of a price.
Yeah. I still have a chance for the white dial because a friend of mine who's into watches, he's got it, and he's quite old and he doesn't really wear it anymore. So one day I'm going to ask him because he probably doesn't know Chrono 24. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let me know if he happens to have 2, because I'll definitely take one.
Yeah, I know. Cool. Hey, Paul, it's been great to talk to you again. It's probably close to an hour or something.
Yeah.
It's been many topics. Obviously, our industry, the whole monetary system. Some looking into the future and guessing. It's definitely going to be interesting to revisit it again in the next 6 to 12 months. So much
Indeed.
appreciated. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks. It's always great talking to you. Thanks for having me on, Daniel.
Thank you. Super.